Good afternoon, everyone. Let everyone get settled. First of all, we want to thank each and every one of you for joining us for this really historic day here at Wake Forest University School of Divinity. It's only the second time we have installed a professor as the James and Marilyn Dunn professor here at Wake Forest at the School of Divinity. And so we want to thank you for joining us for our morning conversation and our afternoon conversation. Both of those conversations were deeply stimulating and deeply rewarding. So on behalf of our community here, thank you so very much. The highlight of the day is truly the inaugural lecture of Alton B. Pollard III as the James and Marilyn Dunn Professor of Baptist Studies here at the School of Divinity. And I'm deeply honored to introduce Dr. Pollard as our next Dunn Professor. Scholars and faith leaders have long sought to understand the complex and evolving relationship between the phenomena of Black religion, its institutionalization in the Black church, and the ethics, epistemologies, and aesthetics of theological education. In 1925, with funding from the John D. Rockefeller Jr. Foundation, the Institute of Social and Religious Research supported the publication of The Education of Negro Ministers. This was a groundbreaking study that analyzed the diverse landscape of Black theological education that was serving then more than 1,000 individuals across the United States. 2 years later, in 1927, Carter G. Woodson's Association for the Study of Negro Life and History launched its own study of Black churches and the education of Black ministers, a project that fell short of Woodson's exacting scholarly standards and would prompt new research efforts. In 1930, Benjamin E. Mays and J.W. Nicholson would engage in a collaborative research endeavor that would result in a study of representative Negro churches, a pioneering inquiry into both urban and rural congregations across the South and North of the United States, with a particular emphasis on how Black ministers were educated in serving those congregations. By mid-century, these efforts converged in the 1959 Seabury consultation, which drew on a generation of scholarship, including H. Richard Niebuhr's Theological Education of Negro Ministers, published in 1955, and the Association of Theological Schools' 1957 call for a national assessment of the training of Black ministers. The Seabury consultation underscored both the obstacles within Black Christian communities to an educated ministry and the necessity of improved education for the flourishing of the Black church. Their work made clear that theological education is never just about the preparation of ministers. It is a living conversation between faith and freedom, between the church and the academy, and between communities of struggle and communities of liberation. In the wake of the Black freedom struggle, Black theological leaders, beginning with Miles Jerome Jones in 1972, to our own Alton B. Pollard in 2008, have deepened this conversation, insisting that theological education must not only engage the academy's production of knowledge, but also the wisdom traditions of communities historically excluded from it. Professor Pollard names this epistemological and spiritual project Endarkenment, a refusal of the false binaries of light and dark, reason and revelation, intellect and spirit. In his vision, Endarkenment is a new episteme, a new way of knowing and being in the world characterized by the belief in the power of wisdom and by the transformation of self, community, and the larger world in the 21st century. It calls for theological education to become an ongoing dialogue, an opening to other ways of knowing, living, and imagining that bear the imprint of the divine presence in human struggle and that is present in the countless peoples around the world, young, old, women, men, societies neglected, the discarded, the alienated, the indigenous, the immigrant, persons of color, citizens of the two-thirds world who are dreaming new dreams and seeing new visions of what it means to be human. It is within this continuing conversation that Professor Pollard has gifted us profound insight. Through Endarkenment, Professor Pollard teaches us that theological education at its best is not about mastering knowledge in a hierarchy of knowledges, but about the radically democratic project of transforming the conditions under which knowledge and life are possible. It is precisely this horizon of faith and knowledge that animated the life and witness of the late James Dunn, for whom this distinguished chair is named. Dunn understood that a living faith must always be responsive to the world it inhabits and responsible to the world it helps to shape. In his reflections on the thought of African liberation leader Julius Nyerere, Dunn pointed us to the ethical and theological dimensions of our shared humanity, writing, "We say man was created in the image of God. I refuse to imagine a God who is miserable, poor, ignorant, superstitious, fearful, oppressed, and wretched, which is the lot of the majority of those created in God's image." These words remind us that theological education is not only about understanding the divine, but about transforming the conditions that deny the divine image in all of humanity. Dunn again is very instructive in this regard, writing, "Not to take a stand in the political context is to support the status quo. To accept things as they are is to indicate either that one is satisfied with present policies, that the situation is hopeless, or that one's religion has nothing relevant to say." This call echoes the Baptist commitment to soul freedom and moral responsibility. It challenges us to see that the task of theological education, and indeed of faith itself, is to cultivate communities capable of discerning and embodying truth in fractured times. The James and Marilyn Dunn Chair in Baptist Studies at Wake Forest University School of Divinity is dedicated to sustaining such vital work, a scholarly and ethical engagement with ethics, public life, and the moral imagination required for democracy's renewal and faith and deepening of faith in the world. It is therefore fitting for Professor Alton B. Pollard III to bring his own distinguished scholarship, bold leadership, and prophetic voice to this endowed professorship. "Our lives," Professor Pollard writes, "are shaped by the friends we have, and our friends are co-authors of our journey in life and in the life of the Spirit." I am honored to have Dr. Pollard as both colleague and friend, a co-author in my journey of faith, thought, and hope. We are delighted to welcome him home to the Wake Forest University community, where he now serves as the James and Marilyn Dunn Professor of Baptist Studies and University Professor of African American Studies. Dr. Pollard returns to Wake Forest bringing decades of intellectual leadership and scholarship in theological education and in the study of African and African diasporic religion and culture. Previously, he served as the 10th president of Louisville Presbyterian Theological Seminary, where upon the conclusion of his distinguished service, he was named President Emeritus. A scholar, author, consultant, and speaker. He has also held leadership and faculty appointments at Howard University, Emory University, St. Olaf College, and also visiting appointments at institutions across the United States and in South Africa. The author and editor of 7 books, beginning with his groundbreaking Mysticism and Social Change, The Social Witness of Howard Thurman, and the acclaimed Black Church Studies reader, Dr. Pollard has published more than 50 scholarly articles and essays and remains a leading voice in the study of religion, culture, and social transformation. The way of a pioneer is a lonely journey. These words by Howard Thurman appear as the epigraph on the first page of the first chapter of Professor Pollard's daring doctoral dissertation. He is a pioneer, and his voice, anchored in the prophetic tradition of the Black church, informed by a global vision of justice, and animated by deep faith, reminds us that our intellectual work, at its best, remains a labor of liberation. Please join me in welcoming Professor Alton B. Pollard III, the James and Marilyn Dunn Professor of Baptist Studies at Wake Forest University School of Divinity, as he delivers his inaugural lecture as the Dunn Professor, entitled Rivers of Struggle, Infinite Hope. Professor Pollard.
No one does it better than Dean Corey Walker. Thank you, Dean. Some of you know that I was looking forward to going off into the clouds of retirement. And that guy called. And here I am. I want to thank all of my colleagues and friends through the years. We've had 2 magnificent panels today. We've enjoyed ourselves. We've had fun. It is so good to be with people who believe in the power of God. I am thankful to be the James and Marilyn Dunn Chair, and I am glad to have had the opportunity to meet James Dunn on occasion here at the School of Divinity when he was in his time with you, and I was passing through every now and then. I went to bed last night after talking to Jessica, and for those of you who do not know Jessica, Jessica is my beloved, and she wanted to be here today but could not for illness, but she is here. I told her that I was going to bed with a clear mind and a clear heart, and then something happened in the middle of the night. I know this is not church, but it is. Bill, get your song ready. I kid you not, in the middle of the night, music began to play in my mind. God has spoken. Let the church say amen. And if I could sing, I would sing it, but I don't want to frighten you. But it just kept repeating, and it kept repeating, and it kept repeating. And I woke up this morning, and it was my father. And that was the song that we played at the end of his funeral service, his homegoing in February. And I have not played or thought about that song since, Dean. And it appeared. And Alton B. Pollard Jr. and Lena Laverne Pollard, Jessie Mae Bryant, Kevin Donnell Pollard, and so many others who made me. I am here because they are. The cloud, the hosts. And so let me begin. Two pieces that I want to read to you first. My favorite historian, Bill, Vincent Harding. It was clear to me that a history of black radicalism in the United States was too narrow, too abstract, too European a means of developing my subject, far too constricted a way to keep the faith. Instead, I knew that what I wanted and needed to write about was something that had never been developed in one work, a narrative, analytical, and celebrative history of the freedom struggle of black people in this country. I was especially concerned to try to convey its long, continuous movement, flowing like a river, sometimes powerful, tumultuous, and roiling with life, at other times meandering and turgid, covered with the ice and snow of seemingly endless winters, all too often streaked and running with blood. Now, with the passing of time and the deepening of our vision, it is possible to recognize that we are indeed the river. And at the same time, that the river is more than us, generations more, millions more. The river of black struggle is people, but it is also the hope, the movement, the transformative power that humans create and that creates them, us, and makes them, us, new persons. So we black people are the river. The river is us. The river is in us, created by us, flowing out of us, surrounding us, recreating us, and this entire nation. And at its best, the river of our struggle has moved consistently toward the ocean of humankind's most courageous hopes for freedom and integrity, the right to develop our whole being. And this from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. One of the most agonizing problems within our human experience is that few, if any of us, live to see our fondest hopes fulfilled. The hopes of our childhood and the promises of our mature years are unfinished symphonies. Is there any one of us who has not faced the agony of blasted hopes and shattered dreams. What then is the answer? The answer lies in our willing acceptance of unwanted and unfortunate circumstances, even as we cling to a radiant of hope. Our acceptance of finite disappointment, even as we adhere to infinite hope. This is not the grim, bitter acceptance of the fatalist, but the achievement found in Jeremiah's words, and I quote, "This is a grief, and I must bear it." Some of us, of course, will die without having received the realization of freedom. But we must continue to sail on our charted course. We must accept finite disappointment, but we must never lose infinite hope. Only in this way shall we live without the fatigue of bitterness and the drain of resentment. From 1954 to 1960, Martin King served as pastor of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. It would be his first and only call to a church as its senior pastor. Born of a lifetime of familiarity with the Black Baptist church tradition and many of its leading pastors and preachers, born into a family of forebearers well known for their social gospel activism, and immersed in a community of believers who were his extended family at Ebenezer Baptist Church. Out of this fount of Black collective wisdom, with all their nurturing and supporting aspirations and demanding hopes, King moved forward, pressed on by rivers of truth and power, past and present, into tomorrow. Both in an ordinary and remarkable sense, these living waters and this choir invisible were the touchstones of King's gestation period. Out of this collective company of the faithful, carrying with him some of their most ardent hopes and dreams, he would come into his own, cultivating ever-expanding ideas about the meaning of the Christian faith and more. I have often thought about this. What does it mean for us in our time? For we who are committed to living faithfully and with expectation in a pluralistic world, that more than 60 years ago, King already considered it inescapably true that the greatest Christian of the modern world was Mahatma Gandhi, a person who never embraced Christianity. King's journey would lead him to the crossing places between pastoral and public ministry, the social witness of the Christian church, and the future of American democracy, to international and global dedications and the struggle for a more just and hopeful world. By the time he accepted the call to Dexter's pulpit, he had completed his formal academic work. He was a theologian, y'all, graduating from Morehouse, Crozier Theological Seminary, and Boston University. Early on, he had wondered if Black ecclesial life could be, and I quote, intellectually respectable as well as emotionally satisfying. Later, he wondered, in his letter from Birmingham City Jail, if white churches and clergy could ever commit to the creation of a more just and perfect union. The dictates of his conscience, driven by visions of Black freedom and equality in an unrepentant and undemocratic racial order, continued to grow and evolve as he tried to keep the faith. King dared to put his trust in what theologian Paul Tillich called a faith beyond the unbelievable. With a counter-hegemonic faith, King set out to translate his graduate school experience. And everybody who's still a student, listen to this carefully now. He set out to translate his graduate school experience, transgressing canonical ways of knowing and being in the service of revolutionary love and nonviolent direct action, and in ways that would make practical connections on behalf of the oppressed. For him, critical reflection had to be creatively realized in the public sphere and in support of social change. From the first, King was determined to bring the power of the Spirit and transformative meaning to bear on the Black freedom struggle, and in due season, bring it to the global revolution of human rights, because this was what the just demands of faith required. Drawn to the pulpit, returning to his southern base, he knew that for his call to God's ministry to be effective, spiritual, cultural, and critical credibility were crucial. All three: critical, cultural, and spiritual. For tens of generations, Black Americans had lived in a state of permanent and grueling exile, in a society dominated by the politics of hierarchy, violence, and fear. But the dynamics of struggle were also a part of the lives of the Black masses. What were those parts? Resilience, resistance, and rebellion. They were growing, forming, and becoming like a mighty, righteous river. More than ever, intimations of the possible were evolving. Black folk were determined to breathe free. With a steady beat, the people were readying themselves, and King needed to learn how to keep faith. On April 5th, 1959, at the age of 30, he preached a difficult and challenging Sunday morning message to his Dexter Avenue congregation entitled Unfulfilled Hope. And I had said to our dean at the very beginning of the semester that hope has been speaking to me ever since the passing of my father in February. I had already written a different, but it no longer had any hold over me. And hope was talking to me. Hope was speaking to me, and it's speaking to me now. King brought forth a word to the people of God with a salve for what ailed them then, and in truth, what ails us now. He preached an uncomfortable message that day on meaning and purpose in the human condition and our responsiveness in the midst of life's most unmet expectations. With pastoral care and deep dedication, he takes the mourning faithful on a historical and futural consideration of the inherent inelegance of human life, and then pivots to the language of hope. In the midst of the American maelstrom, King delivers a surpassing meditation on the human condition that to this day remains tragically uncommon and altogether rare. The morning's text was Romans 15:24. I've already read it to you in part. The exegetical context was the Apostle Paul's ambition to travel as soon as possible to Spain, a then distant geography in the world as he knew it. Paul's expressed ambition was to minister among the courageous band of Christians in Rome and then travel to Spain to be in fellowship with the Christians there, a community that had long suffered from the fires of persecution. Biographically speaking, we know what happened in the text. Paul did not get to Rome of his own volition, but was taken and imprisoned. He was profiled by the authorities. He did not get to Spain. He never made it to Spain. King tells the faithful at Dexter not to succumb to the detritus of disappointments that invariably threaten to overwhelm life. In matters of the human spirit and in our corporal lives, he reminds all of us not to repress hope. In the midst of humanity's blasted hopes and shattered dreams, King offers no easy resolutions, but transparent recognition instead. At every level of human ecology, from individual and family to nation and world, there is a tragic dimension to life. King goes on to say what no one wants to hear, and that few, if any of us, live to see, that our most ambitious hopes and expectations might be realized. In Jeremiah's words again, this is a grief, and I must bear it. There is an arc of discomfort to our existence, an inherent sense of uncertainty to the contours of our lives. Disappointment may be inevitable to the human condition. However, it never has to define us. As human beings, we live, as with all life, with risks and limitations. We cannot judge the affairs of the world based only on our longevity. And panel, thank you all for highlighting that. We must also understand that what we know in our lifetime is never enough. Our connectedness must go further to join our lives with all the company of the faithful, to see freedom's movement across the ages and generations, to bear witness with the multitudes, the many millions gone, to know that change is possible. With this faith, we can testify to the hope that lies within us, knowing that the struggle for freedom is a long and continuing vocation. It is our calling. We are always reminded, amidst the chaos, of the power of infinite hope. Hope is subversive. It erupts from deep places in acknowledging the realities of the human condition. Hope endures. It continues as a commitment that ventures beyond our sense of time and place and circumstance. Hope transgresses. It rises above our socially constructed barriers and walls. It works to effect transformational change not yet seen. Hope does not abandon. Rather, it fires the imagination with lasting intent across the broad expanse of the human condition, across lifetimes inseparable. To be human is to know seasons of ebb and flow. My hope is unfulfilled. There is still infinite hope. We will not be overwhelmed. We dare to hope. Reservoirs of hope are everywhere and available to us all. King is not finished. After discussing Paul's imprisonment in Rome and the severe religious repression and carcerality endured by the early Christians under empire, his reflections draw even closer to home for the members of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. He reminds his parishioners about their soul inheritance, about a resource, a legacy of gift that is always available to them, that theirs is a sacred story about the ancestors and their desolate journey in the wilderness that was to become the United States, forged out of the crucible of horrendous oppression, with creative genius and a dynamic will. Somehow and impossibly, the rejected stones, the children of Africa in America, kept moving forward. King continues to encourage the congregation with his words, saying of the ancestors, and I quote, caught up in a Rome of prisoners' slavery, they had something left. In a seemingly hopeless situation, the forebearers fashioned with their souls a creative optimism that strengthened them. Beyond a Gramscian optimism of the will or pessimism of the intellect, they had something else. Faced with the utterly inhuman and the unimaginable, they refused to be stopped. The ancestors risked hope where there were no grounds for hope on behalf of hope. It is 2025, 400 years and more. We are going through the American madness still. Langston Hughes speaks Black America's mournful lament. Ours is a dream deferred, and life ain't been no crystal stair. Audre Lorde doubly speaks of the truth that all Black women know, which is the truth of all oppressed women, saying, and I quote, "For those of us who were imprinted with fear, it is better to speak remembering we were never meant to survive." The nation is loath to remember the brutality of antebellum America, or to acknowledge the threatening circumstances that currently exist everywhere in this land. We would deny the horrors of post-Reconstruction and Jane and Jim Crow, the policing of Black bodies and beings, and under Southern segregationist law, as well as Northern separationist design. The sad irony is, because we think we know so much about our nation's supremacist past and imperial present, because we think we know so much, we do not want to now face it. As a people, in the public square, our rising depoliticization only contributes to our sense of despair. What keeps us from making the lively human connections that can overcome our sense of despair and inspire us to believe? What prevents us from seeing clearly with critical acumen and through a sacred lens those systems and structures that are in place that thrive on our oppression, that count on our disunion? Langston Hughes speaks once more. We've known rivers, ancient rivers, and our souls have grown deep. Julia Esquivel, a Guatemalan theologian poet, known for her activism on behalf of the liberation of indigenous peoples, troubles the world over with these powerfully ascendant words: "They have threatened us with resurrection." Because in this marathon of hope, there are always others to relieve us who carry the strength to reach the finish line, which lies beyond death. The tragedy in our nation in this present moment is that measures long intended to counter forms of legal discrimination, the right to be treated equally, regardless of one's social location, these measures have shifted. Despite decades of democratizing change, laws and policies meant to ensure just and humane treatment are now being flipped and maliciously turned on their heads. According to this illogic that is as old as the nation itself, the roots of our current crisis are not at all owing to social inequality, but personal irresponsibility and a conforming lack of social mores. The causes and culprits of low socioeconomic standing are subjective and not objective in origin. People and groups are to blame for their own oppression. State and corporate actors are absolved of any culpability. The claims can be so capricious, widespread, and deeply corrosive. Authoritarianism can have its way until even among the oppressed, some begin to internalize and believe it for themselves. And so we vote. In 1959, the resolve of Black Montgomery was faltering. In that 10th season, they were reminded that struggle and gain is a never-ending process with no lasting closure and no final triumph won. For them, the struggle against America's original sin was far from finished and had only just begun. Again, to quote King in his message, "Who among us has not had to face the agony of blasted hopes and shattered dreams?" Dr. Sampson, King is telling his struggling community to commit to sacred memory and ritual, those communities and continuities of hope that sustain us. From our ancestors and elders, he proclaimed, came something that keeps the generations going. What has happened in Montgomery? 4 years earlier, in 1955, the bus boycott thrust the community into the national spotlight. The initial campaign, a one-day trial run launched by Joanne Robinson of the Women's Political Caucus, Edie Nixon of the local chapter of the NAACP, and other Black leaders stretched on and successfully emptied buses for 381 days before ending segregated seating in local public transportation. The strength of this social and political protest was powerfully and principally sustained by the Black women of Montgomery, who, with not a few men, were committed to community-wide change. Still, there seemed to be no end to the onslaught of indignity and injustice Black Montgomery faced. The people of Montgomery reflected the people of Black America amid the searing reality of life's unmet expectations. The Montgomery boycott was a watershed event, and we dare not underestimate its importance. But in the brutal aftermath of the racial backlash, when the hellhounds of hate were unleashed, when Black presidents are elected, in 1959, Black Montgomeryans were uncertain about how to protect and build upon their victory in the near and long term. Ranged against the insurgent Black movement of hope was the white racial apparatus, the Montgomery city government, the White Citizens Council, the governor of Alabama, and the state-sanctioned terror that operated everywhere in the form of militia groups. The clear and unambiguous message was that Black people would not be the arbiters of their own fates. With the limited exception of public buses, white supremacist rule over encounters between the races was strengthened. The hegemony of state power and market forces is a story that is older than the nation itself. King revised his 1959 sermon, Unfulfilled Hope, in his 1963 collection entitled Strength to Love. He renamed the published version Shattered Dreams. Through the years, no matter the title or the text, his vital message of hope to the congregation of humanity evolved, expanded, grew. Now, approaching his latter days, King was advising himself and us to live out the true meaning of your convictions, to never lose infinite hope. Beleaguered and besieged, fighting to keep his own sanity and sense of direction, He would preach a message on the tragic and transformative dimensions of life, on the gift of infinite hope, one last time. Late in the winter of 1968, in the final month of his life, he stood behind the sacred desk, where for the last 8 years he had served as co-pastor before his extended family at Ebenezer Baptist Church. This time he took his text from 1 Kings 8:18 with a new title, Unfulfilled Dreams. His words were stirring, pensive, and self-critical. He spoke from the sanctum sanctorum, the inner recesses of his soul, with what historian and movement activist Vincent Harding called an annealing flame of integrity that burned within him far deeper than all the destructive fires of his inner civil war, deeper than the weight of his own limitations. In one way or another, we have all known the pain of disappointment. We have been, why, Lynn, grieved by our own sense of fallibility. But here at home, in the company of the faithful, surrounded by the deep love and compassion of family and the people who knew him best, King needed to share something of how he had failed himself in his own best possibilities, the promised land of freedom and justice, not only for Black people, but for all people who yearned and struggled to breathe free. It was not here. It was not yet. He cried aloud in anguish and in disappointment, in solidarity and in struggle, in spirit and with infinite hope. Life is a continual story, he told them, of shattered dreams and unfulfilled hope. But that is not all. That is not the end of the story. Even then, King does not allow the seeming hopelessness of any situation to have the last word, to ever outstrip the power of hope itself. Less than a decade would pass from the first time that King preached unfulfilled hope to the last time as unfulfilled dreams. For him, however, those 9 years represented in full measure a life of infinite hope. He did not live to see all his hopes fulfilled. He died without having realized freedom. He kept going with the tensive power of hope. In the 21st century, the struggle for our humanity continues. Our destiny in common is not a fait accompli. Layers of complexity shape and form our identities, as well as our yearning sense of interconnectedness. In our intersectionality dwells the great promise and possibility of radical inclusion, egalitarian witness, and the strength to love. I hear the ancestral griot, Howard Thurman, speaking. Listen for the sound of the genuine. This should be a conscious guide for all our efforts in our mutual work as movements and collectives, in our experiences and in our analyses. We have to go even further than talking about our respective identities and interrogate the structural and systemic challenges of hegemony as part of our collective agency. Hierarchical, misogynistic, heteronormative, racist, xenophobic, transphobic, patriarchal, climate-denying, and profit-driven, the present challenges we face are enormous. We do not experience principalities and powers as separate in our bodies and being, and they are not separate in social justice and change. In our constant strivings for human freedom and the care of creation. Every generation must take a stand and trouble the waters anew. It is January 20th of this year, and the U.S. presidential inauguration has been held. Later that day, later that day, Angela Davis gave a formidable speech at the inaugural Peace Ball, an alternative event held in the nation's capital, uniting voices against war, racism, poverty, and fascism. It was also the anniversary of King's birth. In the constant struggle for justice and equality, Davis noted, there aren't often propitious moments for those struggles. We've always confronted waves of conservatism. And while we cannot create the conditions for the struggles in which we engage, we can bring our determination. We can bring our vision for a better future. And even as we express the deep disappointment, and I'm not going to try to enumerate all the things about which we are collectively disappointed, but we can't find ourselves so ensconced in that disappointment that we don't create the kind of hope that will allow us to move forward and pass legacies to the next generation of people who are struggling. Her closing words echoed those of King. We cannot capitulate to finite disappointments. And what we do is we confront those finite disappointments with infinite hope. And that is what we are in the process of doing. The conditions of struggle today are horrendous. So many people no longer dare to hope, and others are afraid to believe. I am encouraged by the fact. I am encouraged. Folk always say, why you got that hope thing working? Because I am not isolated or alone in this just and sacred work. Countless ancestors the world over, like Nelson Mandela, remind us that each person and generation must be willing to take the long walk toward freedom. I strongly encourage each of you to evoke the names of people and groups you know who are local advocates for social change. Maybe that's you yourself. Perhaps they are members of your family or neighbors, young people or elders. A few may be well known, but most likely do their work quietly, unwavering in their commitment to the creation of a better tomorrow today. Remember from of old, the Combahee River Collective and Third World Women's Alliance, the Occupy movement, the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, and know there are present-day routes of resistance forming, not yet seen. We recognize these rivers of struggle. We see their ebb and flow, their movements, how they churned and changed course like a mighty rolling wave. They are God's rainbow people of every circumstance, representing all shades and hues, all ages and abilities, all identities and intersectionalities. I have so much more that I want to say, but I know that time has come to a conclusion. But I want to talk a little bit about Brandon Terry's new book, but I'm going to skip that and say if you haven't seen it yet, it is a must. It is a towering achievement called Shattered Dreams and Infinite Hope, a tragic vision of the civil rights movement. It just came out 3 weeks ago. I want to leave you with this meditation from A Track to the Water's Edge. The Olive Schreiner Reader, edited by who? Howard Thurman. And she stood far off on the bank of the river, and she said, "From what do I go to this far land which no one has ever reached? Oh, I am alone. I am utterly alone." And reason said to her, "Silence, what do you hear?" And she listened intently, and she said, "I hear a sound of feet, 1,000 times 10,000, and thousands of thousands, and they beat this way. Reason said, they are the feet of those that shall follow you. Lead on, make a track to the water's edge. Where you stand now, the ground will be beaten flat by 10,000 times 10,000 feet. And reason said, have you seen the locusts, how they cross a stream? First one comes down the water's edge, and it is swept away. And then another comes, and then another, and then another. And at last, with their bodies piled up, a bridge is built, and the rest pass over. She said, and of those that come first, some are swept away and are heard of no more. Their bodies do not even build the bridge and are swept away and are heard of no more. And what of that? Reason said. And what of that? She said. They make a track to the water's edge. They make a track to the water's edge. And she said, over that bridge which shall be built with our bodies, who will pass? Reason said, the entire human race. And the woman grasped her staff, and I saw her turn down that dark path to the river.
Alton, you've once again blessed us. Thank you. We now conclude this gathering for this day, moving out on infinite hope, recognizing that we are the ones we've been waiting for. I want to thank each and every one of you for being here. We have a wonderful reception out in the Northex of Waite Chapel, where we can greet our newly installed and inaugurated Dunn professor. Thank you, Professor Pollard, and thank each and every one of you. On behalf of the entire Wake Forest University School of Divinity community, good evening.